When people talk about Thomas Edison and Nikola Tesla, it'll often turn into an argument about who invented what first. With Steve Jobs, we got a situation where he got majority of the praise for technology designed by Steve Wozniak and others that were overlooked. And then you have the case of Bob Kane and Bill Finger, which for many years, Bob Kane denied Bill Finger his justly due credit for the co-creation of Batman. Now, all these situations are different, and they all had different outcomes. But the one thing I think most people could agree with is that at some point in time or another, somebody got the shorter end of the stick. Now, we live in an age where information is literally at our fingertips. So now we're in a position where these stories of these people that might have been lost to time can finally be told. One such story is that of Gene Pelc, who not only made one of the most important deals in the history of Marvel, but also changed the landscape of Tokusatsu and gave birth to the concept of how to adapt it for an American audience.
When people ask me what brought me to Japan, I say there were three people: a woman, Stan Lee, and Spider-Man.
I'm John Sepulveda. I've been a content creator for over 10 years with the YouTube channel Toei Bounty Hunters, in which I produce the docuseries It's Henshin Time, the history of Super Sentai and Power Rangers, probably my best known series on the channel. I've done a couple other ones, as well as some review videos and commentary videos as well. While I was in the information gathering phase for It's Henshin Time Part 3, The Marvel Connection, I came across a scan from a magazine article called Comics Interview Magazine. Now at the time, I didn't know that that was an actual publication that had existed, where they did interviews with comic book writers, artists, as well as anybody else involved in the comic book industry. So the name on the article was Gene Pelc. I had no idea who that was, but what was inside this article in reference to Super Sentai and how there was an interest by Marvel and Stan Lee to make an adaptation for an American audience, that was information that I was able to corroborate. As far as who Gene was, there wasn't a lot of information about him on the internet. I had come to find out that there was another article, another interview that he had done with a magazine called the Friends of Old Marvel magazine, which was an actual Marvel publication that ran in the late 1970s, about 22 issues, and that he had done an interview with that magazine as well, but it was nowhere to be found online. So I believe it was March of 2018 where I was contacted by one of the executive producers of the Toys That Made Us, and they wanted information about Power Rangers and Super Sentai and things like that. So I cooperated with them, told them what I knew, and then not long after that, maybe a couple months after that, I went ahead and just poured over some of my old research, because at this point it was maybe 4 or 5 years that had passed, and I was like, well, there's got to be something available now. So I started looking again, started digging again, and I did find some more information about Gene. Now granted, there is much more available information now than there was back then. At that point in time, I was able to find the article, the Foom magazine interview, and I decided to make the video Henshin Time Unsung Heroes. And to my surprise, after I made that video, I was contacted by Gene's son-in-law, who then put me in contact with Gene's son, and then ultimately Gene himself. I was excited to finally speak with Gene because I felt that he could answer questions that had long been in my mind regarding not only his role with Marvel, but his role within Toei and that partnership and Tokusatsu. It was very important that I meet Gene face to face to see if he could provide more evidence about what he was saying. So I made my way over to Japan, to Gene's home. He was very accommodating, very pleasant, very down to earth, and to me at least, came off as a person that is very honest, a person of integrity. And to my surprise and pleasure, I would also say, I got a lot more than what I bargained for. Gene was born in New Jersey in 1944. His parents were immigrants from Poland, and when Gene was just a kid, they moved to a town in upstate New York called Roscoe, where his family was in charge of the Red Rose Motel and Restaurant. So very early on, you could see that Gene was instilled with the value of hard work. Gene was taught at an early age how to also play the classical piano, and he became very accomplished at it. He was so good that by the time he graduated high school, he actually received scholarships from Juilliard and Fordham University. But it was Fordham University where he would ultimately decide to go and attend his 4 years of college.
It started when I was in university in New York City. I went to Fordham University, and I met my wife there. And frankly speaking, the first time I saw her, I was thunderstruck. And I had to be with her. We got married soon after, had a son in New York. And at that time, I was a disc jockey in New York at the time, a radio disc jockey. I had taken a few trips back and forth from New York to Tokyo and Japan and been here a little bit.
By this time, he had already gone to Japan several times with his wife and kids to visit his in-laws who lived over there.
And I saw a country that I was attracted to, clean, safe, and on its way up. America at the time had been having quite a bit of problems because it was the Arabian oil crisis, and there was a kind of a recession going on because of the cost of oil. So things weren't so good. At that time, Japan was going through something called a bubble period. Everything was going very well for them financially. So I came here at the time when I saw things on the upswing in Japan and things hurting in America. And I started thinking, what could I do here? So I had to look around and say, if I wanted to live here, how am I going to make a living? What am I going to do? What kind of business could I get in? And one of the things that I noticed, and I was a fan of American comic books like most young men at the time, I loved the old comic books.
Well, Gene had actually grown up a fan of Marvel Comics. His favorite superhero was the Incredible Hulk.
But when I came to Japan, I saw something that far outshone what was going on in America. In America, you basically had DC and Marvel doing superheroes, and a very limited number of people who bought it. In Japan, I saw manga everywhere. You could buy them in bookstores, you could buy them in drugstores, convenience stores. Everywhere you went, there was manga, and they were being read by everybody.
And he went to several different bookstores and newsstands and things like that. And one thing that he noticed was there were no Marvel comics anywhere to be found.
There are no American comics here. What happened to them? How come they can't even buy one? And I'd look around and you couldn't find one, even in a bookstore. You say, is there an American comic book? And they'd say, no, we don't carry that. Not available.
He realized Marvel did not have a presence in Japan.
So then I said, here's something. There's this huge industry in Japan. So I go back to the States and I figure, here's a chance. Why is there no American comic books in Japan? There's such a market. Let me see if I can do something. So I make an appointment with Stan Lee.
It was about 1976 or so, 1975 or 76. So he meets with Stan and he pitches him the idea of trying to get Marvel in the Japanese market. And at this time, Marvel is owned by Cadence Industries Corporation.
I meet him at the Marvel Cadence offices, which was in Madison Avenue in New York City at the time. And I said, Stan, you guys are number one in America. You're superheroes, Spider-Man, Captain America are everywhere, but you're nowhere in Japan. You don't even exist out there. Why not? And he said, I don't know, Gene. I'm not sure. We've never succeeded out there. There's no call for our books.
Marvel is hesitant because 12 years prior to this, their biggest competitor, DC Comics, had tried just that. They tried to get Batman, Superman, and Wonder Woman licensed over there, and it was just a failure. It just did not go over well. People, they weren't interested in American comics.
So I said, give me a chance, Stan. I would like to settle in Japan, and I'll go see if I can make a deal for your comics. I said, it won't cost you anything. I'll give it a shot. If I don't succeed, well, you're no worse off than you are now. And if I do succeed, you'll see the deal I bring and you guys buy it or not. So he agreed.
Now with Stan's blessing, Gene goes back to Japan and starts shopping around Spider-Man, which at the time is Marvel's flagship character and their most popular character, and does manage to make his first licensing deal with his Shueisha Publishing Company to have Spider-Man printed in their weekly Japanese Playboy magazine.
Now this was something made for the Japanese Playboy. Now it failed. When I say it failed, they didn't renew the run. I think we did a 6-week or 10-week run of Spider-Man. And then it was dropped because it just wasn't received well by the public. And I could understand why. Nobody was buying the comic book for Spider-Man. They were buying it to see the girls in bikinis and bathing suits.
He then does a little bit of research and realizes that TV might actually be a more viable medium for licensing some of these Marvel properties.
But while this is on, I start watching some TV, and there's some great, what I thought was very entertaining. My son loved it, and I liked it. Japanese superheroes on Japanese TV.
His son Ted, who became a very huge fan of Tokusatsu and a lot of these shows that were being produced at the time, growing up a fan of that, is what really motivated Gene. Ted's enthusiasm over these shows is what made Gene really think like, hey, maybe this is the vehicle. Maybe this is how we need to put Marvel in front of people, is through these shows.
But they were live action superheroes. And it started, one of the first things that I remember seeing and that impressed me was something called Gorenja, which means 5 Rangers, made by, the artist was Shotaro Ishinomori. And then I started looking at these things and I said, you know, this would be great for Marvel characters. These shows are great. Everybody watches them. The kids just love them. And there's comic books all over the place based on TV. And there's merchandising sales everywhere based on the TV show. So I said, let's try to do that. So I'm thinking, who does this? And I find out that it's Toei.
And the person he ends up getting in contact with is Yoshinori Watanabe, who is one of the heads of Toei, the vice president of the company.
And I sat down with him and we negotiated a deal over the next few months in which he would have the rights to develop all the Marvel characters, and I would have the rights, or Marvel would have the rights to develop all the Toei characters. And that was the crystal of the idea that we got together. And then Toei picked the first character to do in Japan, which was Spider-Man, because that was Marvel's main character.
They go ahead and they call Stan Lee over to come to Japan, as well as Mr. Galton from Cadence Industries Corporation.
Oh, I was happy that Spider-Man went to Japan, and in fact, it gave me an excuse to go to Japan, and I met with the people at Toei, and we had a wonderful time. And they told me how they expected to do the show, and we had a very good meeting.
Another thing that Gene realized from his own trial and errors and in speaking with people in Japan was that in order for Marvel to be successful in Japan, it had to be presented in a way that appealed to a Japanese audience.